Speaker, I note that we are concluding this debate a little earlier than normal. And really that is fine testimony to the arrangements that we have in place and your superb handling of this debate. Of course, we have to thank the Clerk of Parliament for all the arrangements that have been put into place for this debate. The Clerk deserves our respect and commendation and appreciation. Mr. Speaker, I was sorely tempted by the Member of Parliament for Dennery South. He used language that tempted me when he said in a moment of eloquence, rare eloquence, that we should look back at the curtains of time. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether it's original, but I liked it. And I did promise myself I would make a search to find out whether it was an original line. If indeed it was, then I was tempted to pull the curtains and go back into time. But then I decided that perhaps this was not the occasion to do so, because he was followed by the Leader of the Opposition, and it was the Leader of the Opposition that took center stage and aroused my interest. So I resisted the member for Dennery South, but I shall return to him later in these concluding remarks. Mr. Speaker, I was genuinely mystified by the approach of the opposition to this budget debate. When you recall the events of the last few days, Mr. Speaker, when the opposition did not invoke the opportunity to participate in the debate of the estimates, and when you heard all the statements in the media, all the excitement, then for a moment we thought that we were preparing for the debate of our lives, that it had to make up for the lost opportunity, and therefore this debate would have been possibly acrimonious, but exciting, and perhaps give the people of the country an opportunity to see the opposition like they have never seen them before. That was the promise. That was what was said on the media. So my thinking was that they would eviscerate this budget, the proposals before this Honorable House, tear those proposals apart, and like shining knights, stride in and give the people of St. Lucia a new and different agenda. Because you have to bear in mind that this was a government that they said had no vision, no plan, did not know what it was doing, and had, at worst, a prime minister who has shattered the possibilities of this country. But I guess within a matter of minutes, the picture cleared. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition commenced a contribution with a statement wrapped in mysticism. All of us searching desperately to find out what it was that she was trying to tell us in those first few minutes. To this day, I can't fathom, I can't distill what the message was, except there were some ringing words: I will not be silenced. She took us on a journey and explored violence, unintended violence, deliberate violence, violence emanating from silence. And then she announced, I will not be silenced. But the truth is, Mr. Speaker, who would wish the leader of the opposition to be silent? Why would I want her to be silent? Why would the government side want the leader of the opposition to be reduced to silence? And why would I, with the support of government members, give her 3 hours in which to speak, the same time allotted to me? Why? Mr. Speaker, you have to appreciate that the leader of the opposition is very well decorated. Very well decorated. She has first degrees. She has a doctorate. She has a PhD. She has experience in international relations. She was a lecturer at the University of the West Indies at the Institute of International Relations. She has written a book. Very well decorated. Very well decorated. But being decorated also means that you carry burdens with you. The truth is that the people of St. Lucia are entitled to hear great things from her. They're entitled to it by virtue of the investment made in her over the years. The people of Mico South, they are entitled to have great, well, I do have an obsession with Mico South, I admit. I admit there's unfinished business to pursue in Mico South. And you have to bear in mind, I will return to Mico South shortly. You believe that any one of us will ever forget the dispatch with which the member for Mico South left the chamber when the announcement was made by the member for Castries Central? I will return to Mico South. So the people of Mico North are entitled to have great expectations. The UWP faithful fully understand that they have a disaster on their hands in the current leader of the UWP. They are entitled to expect great things from her. And the truth is, because of our common history, because we have both had an opportunity to serve in different capacities in an academic environment, I am entitled to hear great things from her as well. And I am entitled to contest her at that level. But there's another reason why people expect great things of the leader of the opposition. And why in this budget reply, the expectations were like none other. That is explained by the 2 key personalities in her political life. The first is the member for Castries Southeast. The second is a current leader of the United Workers' Party, the former tourism minister. With these 2 individuals surrounding her, clearly she has an opportunity to say to the people of St. Lucia that notwithstanding the characters around me, I can be different, and I will be different. But today, what struck me in this budget debate as I reflected, she opted to use the opportunity and to descend to the level of both of these individuals. Something struck me yesterday when I listened to her reply. It struck me that the seats on the opposition benches were empty. The member for Dennery South was upstairs. The member for Migu South had departed. The member for Castries Southeast was not there. The member for Castries Central had spoken and left. Do you know that the only person on the opposition benches who listened to the leader of the opposition was a member for Castries North? And I will tell you that the member for Castries North did so not just out of his personal decency, but also because he understands and he respects the traditions and conventions of this house. What statement is it making when the principal spokesman of the opposition does not have among the audience in Parliament her own opposition members? I have never had that experience. When I served as leader of the opposition on this side, never once did the members of opposition abandon me when I was delivering a reply to a budget. They were always there. Now that should tell you something. That should tell you something. And I will tell you two reasons why that happened. The first reason is this. Neither the member for Castries Southeast or the leader of the opposition has any respect for you. The leader of the opposition political party. The political party. None of them have respect for you. And you know what? Watching the dynamics of this house is interesting. The Minister of Finance presents a budget. And forget for a moment the theater of the leader of the United Workers' Party in the visitors' gallery. And I don't know how long I will be able to put up with this. Because while the budget was being delivered, he was muttering and shaking and engaged in all kinds of theatrics and starting to write as if he's a member of the press and so on. And I will call you to name him at the right time. But the moment that budget statement was given, he rushed to the press to give the press his interpretation of the budget. I looked at this and said to myself, my goodness, this gentleman doesn't have the decency to understand that that is a responsibility of the leader of the opposition, the principal spokesman for the opposition on a matter like this, that he has to rush to the press. And then, of course, the leader of the opposition finds herself in a difficult situation and has to rush herself the next day to call a press conference at which she delivers from some very intemperate and damning statements. But I shall come to that in a few minutes. But there is no budget reply that the opposition should have been as prepared as this one. No budget reply. Why? They did not participate in the estimates. And I'll come to that in a minute, why they didn't participate in the estimates. I'll tell a story. And secondly, they got into their possession a document prepared by my permanent secretary, to the Cabinet of Ministers. In that document, submitted at a budget policy meeting, the permanent secretary gave his views on some of the issues and challenges facing this country. The document found its way to one of our television stations, quoted accurately, but of course, once the document had appeared on the television screens, we were then able to know whose document it was and who had prepared the document. That was a fatal mistake. I am not quarreling and will not quarrel over the fact that the opposition is lucky that they got access to a government document, a sensitive government document. When you're a political party, you're in opposition. If you get your hands on information, you get your hands on information. When we were in opposition, we obtained information about the former government. But it is a different matter when there are civil servants deep inside the government who will then take sensitive government information and pass it on to an opposition. That's a different issue, because that goes to the issue of loyalty to your employer. I'm not going to say no more on this subject, Mr. Speaker, except to make the point that they were armed with this and had very sensitive points of view expressed by my permanent secretary to a meeting of the ministers of cabinet. And that was part of their preparation for this budget reply. Mr. Speaker, but what does the leader of the opposition do? The leader of the opposition chooses to commence her budget reply by attacking my leadership of this country since 1997. I guess it was that attack that caused Mr. Dalson, the member for Soufrière, so much unease. Couldn't understand why the leader of the opposition would want to take that kind of route. My answer to that is very simple. You know, regardless of what may be said about my management of this country from 1997, and as I've said to this House, I'm not without sin. I'm full of sin. Being errors of judgment. But tell you this, I'm proud of my legacy in this country and what I've done for this country. Very proud of it. I don't speak about it. I seek no praise for it. I don't want no praise for it. But there's some things, no matter what you say, you need to explain. He gave you evidence, the member for Labrie Auger. But how do you explain the fact that when the people of St. Lucia decided that they had enough of me and wanted, for whatever reason at the time, to make a shift, that I left behind an unemployment rate of 13.6%? How do you explain the fact that it was the lowest rate of employment since independence? How do you do that? How do you explain that? How do you explain that under my tenure as Prime Minister of this country and Minister of Finance, on the eve of the assumption of office by the United Workers' Party, this country experienced one of the highest growth rates ever since independence? How do you explain that? yet you choose to be personal because you are under instructions that you must continue the description of showing that this was an uncaring, insensitive, and wicked prime minister, the cue that had been given by the member for Castries Southeast. The leader of the opposition was almost apocalyptic. She said, you know, it struck her that in 2015, the people who were 18 years old and about to vote, yes, would have been born in 1997. She tried to be apocalyptic. And the question was, what did I give them? Well, there's an answer I can give you. I can give you an answer. One of the things I can tell you is that a lot of the poor people whose children would have never made it to secondary school, they made it under my stewardship. I can tell you that. But I'm not this afternoon going to waste my time and talk about legacy. I'm not interested in that. But what saddened me deeply were the postures of warfare that the leader of the opposition adopted. She spoke about being an enemy of economic interests, that we are conducting warfare against certain interests in this country. Now, the tragedy is, of course, that she did not define who are those economic interests that we are conducting warfare against. And that some people have to adopt the postures of being an enemy. Now, ask yourself about the sanity of those questions, because you have a general election in a matter of a few months. You may have it sooner, you may have it later, you may have it at any time. And I've already made my position publicly clear that it could be on 17, it could be on 21. Either way you want it, we're ready for you. Either way. Either way. But why would you adopt a military posture to speak of enemy, to use that kind of language in your parliament? Why? Why? But then you claim that we have no vision, we have no plan. I am stunned because the leader of the opposition sat in parliament for 3 hours, listened to a budget. The copy was given to her. Then she says that the government has no plan, the government has no vision. And yet there are people who, after they heard this budget, suggested that we were too strong on philosophy. But somehow, philosophy eludes the leader of the opposition. I can summarize for you. And that is where you failed. Because you did not contested the thinking of the government. You did not contest the plans of the government. The government simply said, look, A, we have stabilized the fiscal deficit of this country. Because we have stabilized the fiscal deficit, we have more room to maneuver. Because we have more room to maneuver, we're going to spend more, and we're going to do so primarily by expenditure in the public sector. The expenditure in the public sector will mainly involve investment in infrastructure, and we gave you the figures. We said to you that will result in an increase in our deficit from the 3.4%, and not 4.1%, which you quoted in some interview, but 3.4, 3.7, back up to 5.8. But the difference this time is this. And I'm not even going to bother and talk about the current surplus and current account. I'll leave that alone for the time being. The difference is this, that while our deficit may go back up to 5.8, we can now manage it And what did we say to you? We said our philosophy on taxation. We promised the people of St. Lucia that, look, you have been paying VAT. We introduced VAT. We said to you, we're going to make adjustments to personal income tax, shift the tax burden to indirect taxes, and we have done just that. We have done just that. And then you say to us, there's no plan, there's no vision, there's no approach, that there's none of that. But you know what irks me with this opposition? I'll tell you. I've sat with them now. This is the fourth budget. Save and expect, except the member for Castries North. And I'll come to him in a few minutes. And the member for Castries Central. Do you know that the rest of the opposition has not made one suggestion, not one, of what they would do differently in this country? Not one. When the leader of the opposition was challenging her contribution yesterday, and someone on this side provoked her and said to her, well, name one suggestion, her only response was, the only advice I would give the people of St. Lucia is to put this government out of office. That was her suggestion for the development of this country. That was it. But she never contested any of the proposals made in that budget. Never. Except glancing blows or glancing references. They take refuge in some inconsistencies between statistics in the Social and Economic Review and the review of regional economies by the Caribbean Development Bank. Now, if the leader of the opposition was careful, she should have remembered that I've warned her leader, her political leader, about quoting from the Caribbean Development Bank. I've been in this business long enough, for years. So has the former Prime Minister. And you see, I'll tell you something. He is a source of extraordinary advice and experience to you. Go to him, and he'll warn you. Tell you when you should make the step and when you should pull back. Because you see, once I lifted this up and made the point, he started to shake his head in understanding. You know why this is faulty, that you don't use this? Huh? The CDB never sends missions to these islands to evaluate anybody's economy. They don't do that. Okay? What happens is that the statistics they rely on is provided by the people who prepared this, the Social and Economic Review. But worse yet, this is prepared primarily for the annual general meeting of the Caribbean Development Bank, which is going to be held sometime this month. So the statistics they rely on to do this, because that has to go out early, are statistics usually for the first 3 quarters of our financial year. Never final. The result is that the information is always inaccurate for that reason. So they can report a negative 2.7, which of course must have got your political leader delirious, excited. Because, you know, he loves to quote from it. Not understanding the pitfalls of this. But they don't have the final set of figures for the last quarter of the year, and that is where he comes in. The extraordinary performance in tourism. So the result is that this is highly inaccurate. You don't quote from this. Don't make that mistake again. When it comes to the figures on the St. Lucian economy, follow his advice. And I will say the same thing to my good friend, the parliamentary representative for Migu South. I think he always listens respectfully, to these engagements, to these encounters, because well, you know, we're all teachers together. He's a teacher, I'm a teacher. I think even the member for Dennery South was a teacher. You were a teacher, he's a teacher. He's a teacher. I think you had a stint. We understand each other. We understand each other. But I want to come back to this deficit issue. I know that the leader of the opposition cannot control the member for Castries Southeast. And there is never a contribution that the member for Castries Southeast makes that is not in opposition or flying in the face or undermining what the leader of the opposition wants to say. Now, the member for Castries Southeast stands up in this house and bitterly complains what he calls new taxes, that we take advantage of the people, I'm wicked, I'm cruel, I'm this, I'm that, and so on. No clinical analysis. But he starts off by saying, every time you come and you prepare budget, you always come in with a deficit. I believe this. He is attacking the government because we have a deficit budget. We do not deny that we are financing a deficit. For years, this has been St. Lucia's problem. He admits there's a deficit. He's complaining that there's a deficit, that we are coming into the budget with a deficit. But then he proceeds to attack every revenue measure that the government introduces to deal with the deficit problem. Question is, if they are really serious and concerned about a deficit in St. Lucia, what are you going to do about it? What would you do? What are your plans? What are you going to do? You already suggest, because you want to bait the poor people, and it's political, absolutely political. The United Workers' Party understands that the middle classes of this country has lost confidence in them. They know that. So these days, it is a pitch for the base of the working class, the base of the Labour Party, the poor people of this country, the very same poor people that a member for Castries Central was able to mobilize in the election in 2006. That's the pitch. So what do? Tactically, you go and frighten the poor people. You tell them they can't eat. You tell them that they no longer eat at their home. You tell them they can't buy cooking gas. You tell them that they can't be treated at the hospitals. You tell them that this is the worst government ever. Never mind the record and the history of this government. But that's the battle, to try to prejudice the minds of the ordinary people in this country. That is why the member for Castries North stands out. And you know, today, when I listened to the contribution of the member for Castries North, I then understood for the first time why he was removed from the leadership of the United Workers' Party. I understood that. Finally, I understood it. But I shall come to that in a few minutes. Mr. Speaker, There's no sincerity. It's just malice. This is an interview with the opposition leader, and I believe it was taken from St. Lucia Times newsletter. She doesn't deny ownership of the statements made in this interview. And I want to read to you the final paragraph in that interview. Mind you, she says that all I've done is to sugarcoat the bitter pill. So at least there must be some, if it's sugarcoat, there must have been something good in the budget. If it's sugarcoat, but it's a pill, she says. And then she makes the statement. Did you hear these spelled out last evening? Did anyone hear in any detail any measures on the part of the government to correct rising unemployment? Did you hear the government say anything with respect to restoring confidence in this economy? Did you hear the Prime Minister present any fixes with respect to creating jobs for the thousands who have lost their jobs in the last 3 years, which I understand they have calculated at 4,000, and I'm coming to that. Partly on account of draconian 15% application of VAT. Everything is VAT, eh? Forget world economic crisis. Everything is VAT. All problems are VAT. A small business going to trouble, VAT. Everything is VAT. Did you hear the Prime Minister say in any detail how he expects to reverse what we have seen as 3 consecutive years of economic contraction? But, Mr. Speaker, you were brilliant. You were absolutely brilliant when you took on the member for Castries South East and explained to him how figures are complicated. That if you have a negative growth rate of 2.7% or 1.9 and you go down to 0.7, it means that there has to be some improvement in the economy. There has to be some improvement. As simple as that. Yet you don't even have the intellectual honesty to say to the people of St. Lucia, yes, the negative growth rate has now decelerated. There are some positive signs, but then going to tell the people of St. Lucia, what matters is how you handle the next couple of months to make the difference. That's what honesty is about. Then, believe it or not, and this is where I wanted to come to, she says, where are the revenue-generating policies? I believe that the leader of the opposition of this country, in an interview with the public, a media outlet asked them, where are the revenue-generating policies of the government? Where is the government going to raise the revenue to carry out the business of the government and pay for the services of this country? She admits and she recognizes that there have to be policies to raise revenue. And the government was courageous and bold enough and said, the reason why we have to do this last set of adjustments is because we failed to convince the unions that they should accept a 5% wage cut. We therefore need to make some adjustments to ensure that we contain the fiscal balance properly. That's my point to you. 2 things. 1, here is an opposition who is gloating over the fact that there's a deficit. Here is an opposition who accepts in the person of the leader of the opposition that the government must introduce revenue measures to deal with this fiscal situation, but then joins her colleagues and seeks to attack every revenue measure that the government introduces. What on earth do you all make of that? Then they tell you, and what is intriguing, and the member for Castries North has understood it, they're gloating over the fact that some islands are now experiencing a little growth in their economies, and we're still having some negative growth. So they mention St. Vincent, they mention Dominica, they mention Grenada, they mention St. Kitts Nevis. But as a member for Castries East so brilliantly pointed out last night, why you don't go and tell the people of St. Lucia the truth? Why you don't go and tell them that in the case of St. Kitts, they had a 17.5% VAT, that they never had salary increases for several years, that they had to undergo debt restructuring, including compelling investors to take haircuts. Why are you going to tell them that? And Antigua, I don't know what comfort the opposition should take from Antigua, because I can tell you, the last budget in Antigua, there was a fiscal deficit of 12.5% of GDP. We're nowhere near there. We are down to 3.7. Why don't you tell people the truth about Grenada? That Grenada is now locked into an IMF agreement, and it is the most draconian agreement that they have ever implemented. And all the things we take for granted in St. Lucia, in Grenada, they don't exist because of that agreement. Why you don't tell the people of St. Lucia that these countries are where they are because of the fact that they submitted to the IMF, and collectively they have had to bear the pain of IMF programs? Why you don't tell them that? Tell them the truth. But a while ago I spoke about legacy. It doesn't matter if you don't agree with me, you know. And I don't necessarily want you to agree with me at this point. But I'll tell you this. They know. I am proud, I am happy that I did not take this country to the IMF. I was advised that the only way these economic problems could be dealt with was to take this country to the IMF. I opted not to, and decided I will speak to the people of St. Lucia directly and say, we have to make some sacrifices. Yes, of course, it costs me. There are some who tell you I'm wicked. My goodness, I've had to suffer that from the time I entered into politics. They say all kinds of things. And we will go down in history, and that is why his point is so important, as not having any support from the opposition in the measures that we had to take to deal with this economic problem, save for the suggestions from the member from Castries North and a member of Castries Central. I cannot think of one policy that opposition said, Prime Minister, we support you in this for the sake of this country. Not one. We did it alone. All alone. Without your help, without your support. And we will finish the term alone. And we will do the things that we have to do. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes. You have a right to be concerned about unemployment. All of us have a right to be concerned about unemployment. All of us. But you know, you can forget your past easily. That is why I said that if I had decided to pull that curtain apart and look behind the curtain, then it would have been a sorry history. Very sorry history, because you see, as I said a while ago, when I left office, when the people of St. Lucia decided to replace the government I led, I left an unemployment rate of 13.6, some may say 14, but it climbed to 21%, 22%. And I don't even know if the member for Castries North will record that we used to really attack him on unemployment all the time. I don't recall we used to.
We attack him on them. What they used to do?
We are. Yes, because I think we even, I remember starting a budget reply of a budget by the member for Castries North. I don't know if he remembers that budget reply. I found them in my notes recently saying, I do not envy any prime minister at this time because of the economic recession now sweeping the world and sweeping the region. And if he is inclined to remember, he in fact will tell you that I made several suggestions. And they were bold enough, they took one or two. But I made suggestions to deal with that. And that's really his point to you, that this is the opportunity for you to have made suggestions in the interest of the country. But you and your colleagues, you hammer unemployment, you constantly talk about unemployment, and you believe, understandably, that it is a vote-catching message. And it has to be, because people's pockets are affected, livelihoods are affected. It has to be. But I don't mean that you have to abandon being responsible. You're an intellect and you have a duty to speak the truth. That's your training. You must speak the truth and reason from truth. When persons cast themselves into a cloak of morality, when they decided that they're going to invoke morality to justify what they do, they carry heavier burdens. And when you see they make mistakes, they have to be criticized and attacked and be treated more harshly. Why? Because they impose on themselves a cloak of moral nobility. That is why, Mr. Speaker, when you see pastors and priests break the Ten Commandments, commit transgressions, steal from the people whom they are ministering to, the judgment on them is harsh and brutal. Why? Because they put on a cloak of morality and nobility. I want to warn you, you put on a cloak. You put on a cloak of morality, you will be judged by that cloak. So when it comes to unemployment, let me now relate that to unemployment, Mr. Speaker. I don't hide employment statistics. I have said in every statement, in every budget, it is a problem. I have said how the government is trying to deal with it. I have said that in this period when investment is scarce, we have no choice but to rely mainly on the public sector to ease the pain of the people of St. Lucia. That is why we went the route of a NICE program. But you know, you say that 4,000 jobs have been lost. I don't deny jobs have been lost in this country. I don't deny that. Huh? You just look at the Goddard's group, MNC group. Some jobs were lost. You just look at Renwick and Company, jobs were lost. A lot of commercial entities took the opportunity to restructure, as they should have done, because of the tightness of the finance. I understand. We made no big job, make no fuss about it. And there is no doubt that every year the problem is worsened because you have at least 2,500, 3,000 young people leaving our secondary schools, entering the job market. So we have to fight against two things. We have to fight against the existing unemployment rate which we inherited. Also, we then have to contend with the rising number of young people coming out of our secondary schools. You will have to be a magician to be able to resolve the problem at both ends all at once. That is, or simultaneously, to use your vocabulary. But the fact of the matter is that if this government did not embark on the interventions that it embarked on, the unemployment rate would have been even more severe than it is. But as a curious statistics, I just want to share with you. Mr. Speaker, I think when it comes to replies, that there's always a little leeway. Mr. Speaker, at page 81, this is a statement of labor force by industry, and it's interesting, and I'm not making any statement about it, really not making, and I'm saying to you that there's no reflection of unemployment, because we have new entrants all the time. But it's interesting that in 2010, this is reporting that in all sectors there were 67,702 persons employed. I think the member for Castries North, you with me? In 2011, it was 71,016. In 2012, it was 74,339. In 2013, it was 74,844. In 2014, it was 74,324. So between 2010 or 2011, in fact, the labor force expanded. But you're saying the opposite. You're saying the opposite. You're saying that 4,000 people have lost their jobs. So, and yet, this is intriguing, isn't it? Of course you'll understand that is not, because while certainly we have lost some jobs, there have been some sectors where there have been expansion in employment. I'll be the last person in the world to tell you I'm happy, I'm satisfied, not with my record of an unemployment rate of 13.6%.
Honorable Prime Minister, instead of 15 minutes, you have 20 minutes left to complete.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for alerting me. I was just about, well, my friend is aeronautical, the member for Labrie, but sometimes when I'm close to him, I get, no, it's okay, I wouldn't want to ask for more time. But I was just about to tell him, Mr. Speaker, I was about to embark on full flight. But before I close, Mr. Speaker, no, I want to ask for more time. Before I close, I thought, and I'm talking now as one prime minister, one former prime minister to another former prime minister, that the contribution for the member from Castries North was thoughtful, was profound contribution. We will probably interpret history differently, and we should. But his contribution deserves respect, and he is right. There are some things that ex-prime ministers and sitting prime ministers need to talk to each other about in confidence. I've always told this House this happened between me and Sir John. Never made it public. And I'm entitled to talk to the former Prime Minister, the Honorable Stephenson King, in confidence about certain issues in this country. But they interpreted that to mean that I was trying to buy him and to woo him and to compromise him. And because of what they did to him, they have set back this country because the relations we were trying to establish with the opposition so that they can perform their constitutional role, they destroyed it. They have no interest in developing the institutional framework of this country. But you know, I just simply want to say, Mr. Speaker, that he and I will differ on the growth figures, because if you look at page 61, and I'm looking at GDP growth in constant prices, I think. I'm not looking at nominal prices, constant prices. The growth rate in 2004, 7.4. In 2005, minus 1.4. I was in office. 2006, 8.6%. 2007, 1.1%. Climbed to 2.8 in 2008. Minus 0.6 in 2009. Minus 0.8 in 2010. 1.1% in 2011. That's what this says. So we disagree on that score. And I would say to you, and you know, that's the interesting thing. You are the only one who looked at the proposals on tax. They were not interested in the proposals on tax except the member for Castries Southeast who attempted to frighten and talk about demonstrations and this and that. Orange March or whatever. But you know, one of the things I want to do is to organize a march against the leader of the United Workers' Party while in office. against him. We come to that.
We'll start in Miko South.
My only advice, I don't agree with your calculations, but the Inland Revenue Department has set up a team, a specific team, to explain to anybody, whether it be the private sector or businesses, the tax measures and the arrangements, and I would wish to make them available to you so that the computations you presented can be looked at to determine their correctness. And I will do so at the soonest. As to the member for Dennery North, what can I say? Dennery South, I keep on making that mistake. You are brilliant. Dennery South. What can I say? I always enjoy the member for Dennery South.
But you forget his password.
Well, yes, when he mentioned the thing about the laptop, I kept on wondering, but what went wrong? Then I understood that the heart of the problem was that his computer, his tablet, something went wrong with it. When the matter was referred to Digicel, Digicel could do nothing about it because the member forgot his password. So they could open. No, listen. Having said that, none of you must go on an inquiry as to why he forgot his password. That's irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. But I thought the classic from the member for Dennery South was this. In the middle of his delivery, he suddenly said, and he asked himself, what am I saying? Why, therefore, should I respond to anything he said when he did not know what he was saying? But the member for Castries Southeast, Mr. Speaker, because I know you're anxious for me to complete. Mr. Speaker, obviously he was under orders. He was all over the place, trying to be leader of the opposition, giving the leader of the opposition reply. And I don't know whether the leader of the opposition doesn't think that the time has come for her to have a shadow cabinet and decide who is going to be lead spokesman and who is not. The question is, of course, is whether she can manage the member for Castries Southeast, but I'll come to that. But there's no doubt that he came for war. He came... My goodness. It's either he wants me to continue, because I just started, you know that. But the good thing about a member for Dennery South, he's learned, he was teasing me and saying, I'm a happier person. Yeah, but he's learned to laugh too, which is good. But there's no doubt that the contribution for the member from Castries Southeast was bitter, vituperative. It was laced with malice, spite, and ill will. All of that. It was oozing anger. And you know, again, he was absent from the House. A statement of the extent to which the leader of the opposition could discipline him. He accused us of putting the debate on a Friday so he can't attend. But my information from the member for Castries South is the Sabbath starts at 6 o'clock. Sunset, all right? But the sun is setting around 6 these days. After 6, sometimes 8. And again, for the entire day, he chose to be absent and away from the parliamentary benches. So, he was not there to hear the reply of the leader of the opposition. Neither was he here to hear my reply and my answers to him. But the point is, the whole public can now see that his absence had nothing to do with his Sabbath. Absolutely nothing. And that is typical for 4 years. Speak and then disappear And that is the quality of representation. But you know, there was nothing that he said that, as far as I'm concerned, warrants a reply, because his political pitch, Kenny, he said was, he said that I was wicked, and that's, I was wicked, and there's language that he used that was very interesting, which I wanted to quote that language to be a little more precise. But it was a government that was wicked to the core. That was his language. That was his language. Then, of course, he took to reading previous budget speeches, because that was a method of preparation, and then mentioned that how I said St. Jude would be opened in 2000. Of course, I did say that, based on the information that I had as incoming Prime Minister. But then I made it clear to Parliament that the scope of the works of St. Jude Hospital had changed dramatically. And as a matter of fact, I remember in a moment perhaps of grandeur, of love for my constituency, I said to Parliament that I have to make sure that the people of Beaufort receive a hospital that is as good as the hospital in the north. I think you remember that. So I said all of that. But something has to change in this house. Something has to change in this house. If we had to have a test of truth, there is not one single budget debate that a member from Castries South has spoken, and Castries Southeast has spoken, and he has passed the test of 100% in truth. On every occasion he's lied. Every occasion. And that's a hard thing for a member to say to each other. But I say that without apology, Mr. Speaker, because he sat there and he accused the government of having said in a budget statement, which he read out, that we'll put out the roads to tender the DFCs, and that we have not put any. The Speaker tried to correct him and say, what is your evidence of that? He admits that he has no evidence. Then he says to us that how can I give evidence? No, he said, how could I give evidence about things I don't have? Classic. But of course you know that doesn't exist. The member for Castries East stood up and corrected him. He persisted. Mr. Speaker, the member for Castries East showed all the Voice newspapers that those projects were advertised. Lot 1, Beaufort to Labrie Highway, from Hiwanora Airport to St. Jude's Hospital. Lot 2, PI to Saltibus. Lot 3, Banslaho Package. Banslaho Package 2. All of those things were in the newspaper. Yet he accuses the government of no open tender despite his statements. Now, I'll tell you something. We are the two parliamentarians left after 97. So the two of us, we are the last of the Mohicans, as he said. We have our disagreements. And disagreement sometimes is good, it is healthy, because there are different points of view. But let no one attempt to put differences between us. We are like that. We understand each other perfectly. Perfectly. There are times I have to yield to him. There are times he yields to me. That's the nature of the friendship we have. If there's a political friendship, if such a thing exists, it is a friendship between the two of us. Of course there are moments of displeasure. Of course there will be. There's nothing wrong in that. But let me tell you this. This minister will not do something that he knows I have pronounced on and that I support. He knows that. And you see this? It is in obedience to that statement in the budget as well as in obedience to his own convictions, that those things are. Now, things have to change in this parliament. I am going to bring a motion of censure against the member for lying and for misrepresenting facts. This thing has to stop in this house. This house will have to debate a motion of no censure against the member for Castries Southeast. You cannot deliberately, Mr. Speaker, continue to mislead the House on vital information like this. It may not have happened in the past because we never had representatives who would so blatantly tarnish the truth, who would ignore the advice of their colleagues, who would act with impunity against the chair. That has to end. And if I have to create history by bringing this motion of censure, that for the first time it happens in this parliament, it will happen. It has to happen. This can't be right. That you are shown, you are told, you are shown that it was in the Gazette, in the newspaper, for all and sundry to see. And then you want to impute improper motives. Let me tell you this, Madam Leader of the Opposition. I said once that when a member of Castries Southeast is concerned, this party, this government, will take him, stretch him, and tie him around the neck of the leader of the United Workers' Party. Yes, because of his history. And the Speaker's button is about to go. It hasn't gone, but let me tell you this. Let me tell you this.
Honourable Member, you have 5 minutes
Thank
remaining.
you, Mr. Speaker. You are more generous than the member for Dennery South. Mr. Speaker, I'm rounding off now. Mr. Speaker, this country will face a general election, as I said, anytime in the next 18 months or so. I've said to the opposition, it could be on the old 17 constituencies, it could be on the 21. We're ready for either. Well, I don't know, you may win me. I don't know if you'll win me or not. You were a minority winner the last time. Never forget that. You didn't get a majority. You only get a majority out of 3 candidates. Right. Now, that being said, I want you to reflect for a minute. There were those persons who, when they looked at this budget, they said, oh, it was an election budget because of the, I don't know what was in it that was an election budget, because maybe the income tax issue. I don't know. Maybe the roads. I don't know. Everybody agree that you need to introduce growth, push growth now that we have contained our fiscal deficit. But I'll tell you this. There are not many governments who on the eve of an election will introduce new taxes. There are people who think I'm mad, or this government is mad because on the eve of an election, 18 months away, we have introduced some new taxes. Ask me what the comfort is. I'll tell you what the comfort is. And mind you, the very same taxes have allowed you to cast all kinds of aspersions, say all kinds of things. Don't care, we're insensitive, we're wicked, we're this, we're that. But I believe deep in my heart that when St. Lucians reflect over this period, when they understand clearly that this government took them away from the IMF, when they understand that we have put this country on a secure financial foundation, they will, at the end of the day, despite whatever misgivings they have, admire the courage of this government. I prefer to go into the elections on the basis of courage. Courage to do what is right for this country. Not engage in political expediency. Not engage in behavior that his sole mission is to attract votes. I am prepared to pay the price. Why? I believe in this country, And I know we have a historical mission to protect and secure the future of this country. Mr. Speaker, that is my mission in life. I thank you very much.